Friday.
Yes.
We've got some good ones, and we've got, like I said, a very interesting topic. We haven't even really dug in completely to all that's happened this week, because there are a few other things. We'll fold it into the next segment. Why don't you introduce everyone to our illustrious guests?
Yes. So, welcome. We've got a returning guest, Alexandra DeSanctis, right? She's with National Review. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
And then first-time guest on the show, but very excited to have him, Mr. Stanley Fritz from Black Enterprise. Welcome.
Good morning, guys.
And also, he's a colleague of Selena Hill, who's been on our show and co-host on the radio show with her called "Let Your Voice Be Heard." So
that's a podcast you can find on
iTunes, Stitcher,
everywhere.
wherever you get your podcast.
Let Your Voice Be Heard podcast.
Yes.
Stanley and our good friend also, so Selena. So you know what Carrie's idea here is today. We're going to try to grade President Trump on a few areas of focus. But before we get into the grading, let's sort of touch on them a little bit. Let's talk about health care. It has come back to life this week. A lot of people, they wanted to try to have a vote on it today. The president himself is who encouraged Congress to take this up again. They had decided to move on. Mitch McConnell said they're going to move on. Paul Ryan said they were going to move on. The president decided to bring it back to life, possibly because he didn't have a legislative victory in his first 100 days. And it looks like, since they pushed it back to next week, that he still won't have one in his first 100 days. Alexandra, why do you feel like they brought it? Why do you feel like it was so important to bring back something that wasn't successful last time, and is there a possibility for it to succeed this time?
I think there's a large factor of Trump just trying to get something done. As you said, he clearly hasn't had any legislative victories yet, and healthcare is something he said Obamacare would be repealed and replaced on my first day in office. Not just in my first 100 days contract, but on my first day in office. So at this point, we're now at day 100, and that hasn't been done. So I think there was a lot of pressure from the White House this week on Congress to bring this back up, even with the spending bill looming today. So I'm sure it came from Trump, because Republicans were set on putting it aside for now. And I do think there's a good chance of this bill passing rather than the last one. But as you guys were both talking about earlier, I think they've lost a lot of moderates at this point. So it's tough to see exactly how the final bill will turn out to get the support it needs.
Is this something that progressives, or you know what, let's not make it a partisan thing. Is this something that people who rely on Obamacare for health care should be worried about?
Absolutely. Let's first understand that this is a poison pill bill. It is a bill that is pretty much a big tax relief cut for the 1 and the 0.1%. It's not going to help any working class person in the U.S., even though Trump said he'd get universal health care. So instead, what you're doing is kicking 24 million people off of the rolls, raising premiums, and then putting people in high-risk pools that didn't work in the 90s. This is not good. Progressives should be worried, but as we have been, we will be resisting.
Talk about the high-risk pools. Explain those if you can for how that works, and I'll let you respond to it too, Alexander.
So bear with me, but the high-risk pools is pretty much this idea where people who had pre-existing conditions, people who maybe they could not afford to get the health insurance, would be put into these pools where insurance companies could then offer them plans that benefited them. Usually these high-risk pools were unaffordable. People were not able to pay them. They had all sorts of caveats. For example, my mentor, his wife, she had insurance through the high-risk pool. They cut off her plan because they said they had spent too much money on her, even though she was paying a skyrocketing premium. These high-risk pools had been a failure in the 90s and in the 2000s, and it's why one of the big things about the Affordable Care Act was making sure you could no longer refuse people insurance or charge them more for having a pre-existing condition, like being a woman.
So Representative Joe Barton was on CNN yesterday talking specifically about high-risk pools and how they are set up, and he would disagree with you, Alexander. Your take on why Republicans and conservatives believe high-risk pools are effective ways to provide coverage?
You know, I'm not sure exactly that all Republicans would agree on high-risk pools. I know that's something they've kind of formed a consensus around right now. But I think the biggest issue here is the fact that Obamacare really wasn't working, and the fact that tons of insurers have been leaving the exchanges in every state. Some states are down to one insurer in their state exchange, and that's just not an acceptable situation. People's premiums are going up. A lot of people are just facing the situation of having no options. And so whether we solve that with high-risk pools or something else, I think you have to at least admit that there was a problem there.
I want to reject that aggressively, actually. That's not true. Obamacare was not failing. And what we saw was some slight increases in premiums, but that was just for this year, and it was showing that it was going to normalize the following year.
I don't know. My insurance personally went up by double digits every year under Obamacare.
Yes, your insurance, but insurance
But and
premiums were-
nationally too. Nationally,
insurance
across
premiums
the
for most
country.
people were going up even higher before the Affordable Care Act.
Why are insurance companies pulling out? Why are insurance companies not participating? And I got a follow up to that too. Either one of you, go for it.
I mean, I don't know for sure, they haven't all said, but I believe it has to do with the rising costs because of Obamacare and the lack of competition.
Is there an argument that the solution to health insurance and health coverage and health care in the country should not be so focused on what's best for the insurance companies, but instead what's best for the patients?
Absolutely. I think that should be the argument. I don't think that healthcare should be for the insurers at all. But I do think
the
that
changes seem to be focused on what's going to make these insurance companies
I think it comes from a free market idea that the better conditions are for insurers, the lower prices they'll be able to offer to consumers.
They had a great atmosphere in the 90s, and it was horrible for people. And also, this Trump care plan would give them a $92 million tax cut and allow them to get breaks for giving raises to their executives. It doesn't help working class people. Listen, it's very simple. You're going to pay for health insurance whether you like it or not, either through someone who has to go to the hospital and get direct care and can't afford it, or through an insurance plan. The best way to help poor and working class people is by getting universal health insurance or single payer. Because this plan right here that we have,
that's going to happen under this particular.
Yeah,
it's
I
not going
also-
to Congress.
Well,
Donald Trump couldn't organize or legislate himself out of a bathroom, so of course it's not going to happen under him. And Paul Ryan, who was supposed to be this conservative or libertarian savant, came here and after criticizing Obama for rushing through this bill, tried to push through a horrible tax cut for the rich in 2 weeks and failed. I don't really trust him to do anything. What I will say, in 2018, when we have midterm elections, I hope they're all sent to the unemployment line so they can read their Ayn Rand books to their friends and not to the American people. And then we can push for
I feel like
single
you
payer.
practiced that one. I like you rehearsed
That came off
line.
the cuff, Claire. Come on. I got the smart glasses
Come on,
on.
he's the host. He knows how to riff. He knows how to riff.
I got my smart glasses on. I'm ready.
No, but Trey Wright here makes an interesting point. He says healthcare and health insurance are not the same thing. So, and I have to bring up this study in Oregon that found people who had Medicaid and people who did not have Medicaid, there was no differential in terms of how healthy they were. So it's not that having access to health insurance is going to make your life better in Medicaid. It's about what you do with your life in terms of, are you eating well? Are you smoking? Are you not smoking? Are you making proactive choices that are based on outcomes and not so much focused on whether someone has a really bad insurance plan? Because this is the problem with single payer, is that the insurance that you offer to low-income families, it's really, really bad. It's got very narrow networks.
How does
It's
the
got a very
conservative
limited
plan-
range of doctors who even accept the plan.
How does the conservative plan, which allows insurers to provide less coverage, ensure that people are incentivized to make those healthy choices, to go see doctors for regular checkups? If you've got a healthcare plan where insurance companies don't really have to provide anything except for catastrophic coverage, that doesn't necessarily incentivize somebody to show up for regular routine checkups, does it?
I don't think that it does, but I think we have to keep in mind that once you give insurers a lot of freedom, often the competition between them will drive prices down.
Like
I
the
think that's been
90s,
shown
when it
historically.
was super high and people couldn't afford it, and 45,000 people a year were dying because they didn't have health insurance.
We didn't have a fully privatized health insurance.
Yes, because we had the Medicaid option, because we had to include it because people were dying and could not afford it. Listen, we can disagree on ideology, but if the goal is to make sure that people have affordable, accessible health insurance, the Republican plan is an abject failure, and it was never a good idea to begin with. And what's frustrating is the plan that we have now actually came from the Heritage Foundation with a couple of progressive rings to it, and Republicans still hate it. But if Mitt Romney would have brought this up, if Mitt Romney would have won in 2008 and passed this plan, Republicans would love it. The only reason people have problems with it now is because the black guy with the funny name was the one that pushed it through.
I reject that. I don't think that it's fair to bring race into disagreements about policy. I really think that's not fair. But I also think that we talked about this before, the Heritage proposal in terms of mandating a health insurance plan, that was a $20 bicycle helmet versus a $200 bicycle helmet. So either way, you're getting a helmet. And the question is, how affordable affordable do we want to make it for the middle class and for just Americans in general? And that's the big disagreement here. And the more you allow the private sector in, the more you drive down the price. And so we saw this explicitly, like with LASIK, for example. You can get LASIK now at a fraction of what it used to be because health companies and most health insurance plans do not cover LASIK. Yet this is a medical procedure, but look at the price. It's just steeply plummeted. Confession, I bought LASIK using a Groupon, and it was so cheap.
And that's where our eyeballs bleed every day.
Larry, I have mine.
It was so cheap.
Hold on, let me go back to
this. This is what happens when you allow
let me go
people
back
to
to this
compete
point that
in a healthy way.
I have yet to hear a response to that I can get on board with, and because I don't necessarily agree that that Republicans or conservatives rejected the plan because the president was black. I do think that there were issues related to race and how people were afraid of a president
the
who
birther
looked
stuff
like that.
was total crap.
Certainly, there was
think that's
something
wrong.
there.
The entire
but
opposition.
hold on. There was certainly something there that I think did incentivize people to sort of reject him as a president and therefore everything he stood for. But the question that I have not heard answered in a way that I just can is how anyone can say that what you did say is correct. Mitt Romney implemented this in Massachusetts as governor. The Heritage Foundation created the template for which that Obamacare was built out of. How is it created by, implemented by Republicans, and then all of a sudden not a good idea because how's it a disaster? I get a lot of spin from that, but I never get a straight answer. Oops, okay, we did create it and we were wrong.
Well, just speaking to Mitt Romney in particular in Massachusetts, I think there's a huge difference between a health care plan created by a state legislature and implemented by a governor for a state and a nationalized version of that. What works for one state isn't necessarily going to work for the entire country. That's why we have federalism. And that's why I think one of the good things about the current plan is that states can do what works best for them.
And that's exactly what Mitt Romney said on the campaign trail. So we got to move on to the next topic. We could stay here all hour, but
we gotta
now
grade
it's the
him.
moment of truth.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
do.
so we're giving grades. We have all these cards, so we're having our guests and Clay and I, moment of truth.
Yeah. Well, I want to be clear. I
where's-
want to make sure, give a little caveat here because there's some confusion as far as I'm concerned. I want to be very fair. I try to be very fair. I have a feeling I know what your grade's going to be. But all A's, right? When I was in school, the grading scale was 93 to 100 was an A, and anything below 70 was an F. It's hard for me to grade a president who I don't agree with on much of anything something higher than a 70. So I'm going to grade based on, could it be worse or could it not be worse? So I'm not, I just wanted to throw that out there right now in case I don't give an F for everything.
I also want to ask you, just because you're the only one at this table who actually knows Donald Trump personally, just as a human being, how you would grade him. But we'll talk about it
Well,
at
let's
the
get
end.
to the overall
Yes.
grade, yeah.
All right, so healthcare. We're asking our guests, how do you grade President Trump so far on healthcare?
Okay, you got to explain your answer.
So I think it's pretty self-explanatory. He promised to repeal and replace the Obamacare on his first day in office. He didn't do that. And then he came and supported a plan that does the opposite of what he promised the people that he campaigned for. He said, you're going to get universal health insurance. You guys are going to all be covered. It's going to be so affordable, and the government's going to pay for it. And the plan that we see here is going to strip 24 million people off of health insurance. It's going to double premiums. It's going to gut Medicaid, and it's going to give tax cuts to the rich.
Okay, we let him have his piece. You
right.
got an F. Alexandra?
I say D primarily because he hasn't done anything on healthcare. He said he was going to repeal and replace it. He didn't offer any solution of his own. It came from Congress. The plan that they have right now came from Congress. And when it came down to the line to get it passed in March, he failed, and he was negotiating and couldn't get it done. So he couldn't even get the one plan that he didn't create through Congress.
Well, we may actually look at this. I'm agreeing with somebody in the National Journal. I gave him a D too, and I gave him a D because while I do think that what he promised and what he has said he wants to do would be disastrous for millions of people who have health care now because of Affordable Care Act, he hasn't done it yet. And I said, and that's why I gave that caveat to why I'm giving him a D instead of an F. If for some reason this plan were to pass, it probably would lower his grade to an F. But right now, I'm going to give him a D simply because he has been late to class so much and not shown up that I'm not giving him an F yet. That's my thing.
Okay, so I am giving him a C. C is for Cookie and for Carrie and for Trump's healthcare grade because he basically He did sign an executive order on his first day in office, which was relating, giving some flexibility. So he did that. But I do think that this was a botched politics. Like his whole thing was that he ran on the art of the deal. He clearly was not able to make a deal. I also think that he outsourced too much of this to Steve Bannon. And I was glad to see that after that, he's now reining Steve Bannon in. So I think there's potential for the grade to go up.
Is Steve Bannon even there anymore?
He's there. He wants to keep him around just because he does have a pulse on the blue collar kind of working class sentiment.
Wouldn't call it that.
No, that's who propelled him to office. But yeah. So anyway, I think there's potential, but I think given everything that's gone down right now, he's just average.
So let's move on to fiscal policy, and let's get our grades ready for fiscal policy.
Yeah, why don't we do
because
that
our
first?
next topic, and
Yes.
then
How about we grade first, and then we
can
talk about
explain
it. Yes.
what it is that we have to do. So fiscal policy this week, I think, is a big, just yesterday, Wednesday, was a big moment in fiscal policy for the president. He unveiled his tax proposal, his tax cut proposal, which would be, if it were to pass, would be probably the most sweeping piece of tax legislation since 1986 and Reagan and Tip O'Neill's plan. I think that's probably the biggest point we have to discuss on his fiscal is what he wants to do. So, Carrie, do you want to go first and tell us what your grade is?
If it was just the
Jesus
tax
in
plan
heaven.
only, stop it. No. I have to do caveats. If it was just the tax plan, it would be this, but overall fiscal policy on this, because I think his budget is finally helping taxpayers. Someone has to stand up for the taxpayer. Like at some point, as Margaret Thatcher, my idol, would say, you run out of other people's money. And so we can't just, pretend that we're not, our debt to GDP ratio has not shot up under President Obama. Like our debt doubled. Like it took 45 presidents to do what Barack Obama did in one term in debt. So this is not okay. And so I admire President Trump's budget in terms of paring back the size of government, and I think the tax plan is exactly what we need to jumpstart our economy. Also, one other thing, last night I was glad to see that Donald Trump walked back his fighting words against NAFTA. He's not going to pull out of NAFTA, which is a good thing, and so he's learning. I don't know what you're doing, Clay.
I'm having a hernia. I really am about to have a hernia. I cannot. Okay, I don't even know how. Put your letter down because it's just complete crap. I can't.
According to you.
I can't begin to. Can't even begin. Let's just talk about the debt thing. So the debt to GDP ratio. We've talked about that many times on here, and about how
some debt is
and how
fine.
debt is
I agree.
fine if you can.
Some debt, but not like
okay.
doubling the debt.
I
in
just
one
sat
term.
here and breathed while
Okay.
you spouted all
All
that
right.
nonsense. So let me do the same without the nonsense part. The debt to GDP ratio we have talked about. Debt is fine if you can afford it, if the economy grows at a rate that your GDP can afford it. But what's most amazing to me with what you said, you can do that. Just don't talk. Most amazing to me with what you said is that Donald Trump has said that he is, quote, the king of debt. I think Norah O'Donnell from CBS claimed that Hillary Clinton called you the king of debt, and he said, no, she didn't call me the king of debt. I called myself the king of debt. He loves debt. He thinks it's valuable. He understands that it can be valuable. He thinks it's important. And his tax plan would balloon the debt in ways that we have not seen in maybe ever. So you can't say on one hand that his tax plan that his fiscal policy is good because Obama's debt was so high when his tax plan would make the debt higher than Obama could even dream of. Secondly, his tax plan is wonderful and does help people if they're rich as hell. I mean, the bottom line is it helps the wealthy. The cutting the corporate tax rate. I'm a freelancer. I don't work for anyone. I run my own business. I have a LLC, and everything that I get paid for gets run through that LLC. Cutting the corporate tax rate is going to be great for me because instead of paying 35% now on everything that comes through my corporation, I'm going to pay 15%. That's wonderful. But if you don't think that millions of people are going to figure out a way to just freelance so that they can get paid through a corporation instead of having to pay a higher rate, if you don't think that 15% tax rate is going to be the way the majority of people over a certain income level are going to end up paying their taxes, then you're crazy. And when so many people pay 15% because they've got attorneys who let them do it and help them do it, and accountants who help them do it, that debt's going to go sky high. I gave him that's not a. He doesn't even
right.
deserve
That
an
was
F. He doesn't even deserve an
fuzzy
F
math
on
right
tax
there, Clay.
policy,
That's
on
some
fiscal
fuzzy
policy.
math.
He deserves an upside down F. That's my case. Okay, I know you want to say a lot, and I want to let you, but let's let Alexandra
yes.
dispute my words. There, go for it.
Okay, so I'm gonna go with a nice average C, and that is for a couple reasons. So first of all, I'd say I think Trump is right on the principles of his fiscal policy, but he's very bad in practice. So for instance, getting rid of TPP, I think is a huge mistake. I think free trade is a good thing for a country, and to just unilaterally pull out of a trade agreement because you think the U.S. would be better off doing what's best for us. Well, what does that mean? What is fair trade? He hasn't defined any of that. So I think that's a mistake. I was glad, as Carrie said, to see him backing off of pulling out of NAFTA, but I don't think he has any idea what's going on in the realm of trade. In terms of the tax reform plan that he offered, I think the plan itself is probably not the best plan, but I think he's right that we need tax reform and we need taxes to be lower. I think taxes have been much too high for much too long. I think the fact that corporations pay 35% is ridiculous. The fact that I, as in my first year out of college, have to pay 20% of my taxes to the government, I'm barely making any money, and I'm paying a ton of it, money that I could be saving, to the government. I never see that money again. I think that's a very big problem with our country right now. So I agree with him in principle that taxes need to come down. I don't know about the intricacies of this plan. I don't think it will work very well, won't get through Congress. So that also pulls his grade down to just a C.
I like this going in this order one time and this order.
we mix it.
Now,
We mix it
now
up.
you can say it. I can tell you how much
mix it
crap
up.
you spouted. You can dispute me, and then we'll end with you, and we'll see what the other progressive at the table has to say about Trump's fiscal policy.
I was trying not to be mean and give him a D, but now I want to give a question mark because I have no idea what you were talking about, Carrie. First of all, this tax plan is atrocious, and I know I say that about a lot of things that Trump does, but I'll give him one plus. He's really funny on Twitter when he's not being racist. The tax plan would, first of all, cut the tax rate for the top 1%, cut the tax rate for corporations. It would take out chunks of money from the government that, by the way, Trump and Congress and the GOP have not talked about how they're going to pay for it, because it's either we're going to inflate the debt, which you said we shouldn't be doing that, or we're going to have to tax poor and working class families. And by the way, Secretary of Treasury cannot guarantee that middle class families will not see a tax increase under this plan. So now, after Trump said he was the champion for these same people, for poor and working class people, and said he would protect them and he would look out for them and he would drain the swamp, what he's actually done is pump a whole bunch of swamp discounts to the super rich and going at the poor people. Listen, I don't believe this guy knows math. I think he thinks 2 + 2 is 22. But you can't put up a tax plan and say it's affordable when at the end of it, people like me and my good friend over here are going to be taxed so much we can't afford to pay attention.
I love that he comes with his lines.
You're great.
2 + 2
You're
is
great on
22.
Twitter. This is awesome.
Swamp.
Yes.
What'd you call it? Swamp credits?
Swamp
Yeah.
discounts.
Swamp discounts. Oh God, I can't
No.
afford to pay attention.
Well, okay.
Does it bother you
So-
that his tax plan would give him a huge tax cut?
Does it bother you that
This
he's
is-
not using
okay,
math?
This is the point, and I have a piece on Bulldog Global about this in terms of the tax plan and how it helps the middle class and how Republicans are really bad about talking about this. This is something that 2 years ago, Kellyanne Conway, before she became this household name, was talking about this. The problem with Republicans traditionally is they're always talking about tax cuts for corporations, tax for job creators, but most people are not job creators, they're job holders. So they do a terrible job, and Mitt Romney, unfortunately, was guilty of this, of not explaining how when you cut taxes for job creators, that means it is amazing and a huge benefit goes to the job holders.
That would assume
because that means you have more jobs that are created, you have more economic growth, you have more ability to pay people who are working for you.
Listen, that would
This
be
means-
implying that
this
you would
means
think
I
that,
can
that
hire-
McDonald's is going to take their tax cut and the money they save from tax cuts and put it into hiring people versus putting into iPads that'll take people's jobs away. And I'm sorry, I don't think the vast majority of American people have any faith in huge corporations to do what's valuable for what's important and what's helpful to workers versus what's helpful to their bottom line. And they're not going. If I gave you $100 right now, you would either save it for yourself or you'd spend it on yourself. You're not going to go and spend it on, oops, sorry about that, Ben. You're not going to go and spend it on hiring someone else. That's just not what people do when
Well, I
they
can't
get money.
hire someone for $100, but
you could if they got rid of the minimum wage.
I want to hire. I would love to hire more people. Bold is growing. Like if I.
I think you missed my point, girl.
Anyway, the point is, yes, people would spend more money on hiring people.
They don't though, and it's been historically proven that doesn't happen. The economy grows from the middle up because poor middle class people, when they get a tax cut, when they get more money, they pay bills, they stock up on groceries, they buy food for their families, they catch up on mortgages. This is what they do. You give a tax cut to Bill Gates, he already has money on top of money. He's not going to put it on top of his money. He's going to put it in some bank that's holding others piles of money. You give it to Stanley Fritz, who makes negative $2 an hour. You know what I'm going to do with it? I'm probably going to get a bottle of whiskey because I'm going to need it after this conversation, but I'm also going to pay my cell phone bill, be patient, Sprint, and I'm going to catch up on bills. When you help poor and middle class people, it helps the economy. And then when they're spending money, now they can subscribe to Bold because, you know, maybe Bold has this new show that you have to go through a paywall for. And then they can pay for Bold. You can hire more people. And when they say, you know, I don't believe in logic or math, and they decide to subscribe to the National Review, now they can pay you more money and hire more people. When you give it to rich people, it just disappears.
Hold on, you got to give her a chance to come back at that.
Sorry, that's not
Well, I mean, on behalf of National Review, I don't think that that's what our readers are in favor of. I think
Not to mention, they were very strong against Trump. You should give them credit for that.
and we remain strong against Trump.
they're
But
human beings.
But trickle down, honestly, Alexandra, everybody's still waiting for their trickle. You know what I mean?
Trickle down is a phrase invented by people who hated Reagan to attack Republican plans.
Like
on the
Obamacare
economy.
was and death
Maybe so,
panels
maybe it
were
is. But
created.
trickle-down economy is not something that any conservative has ever advocated. Okay, what I advocate and what I believe National Review advocates and something like this is freedom. A corporation gets to do with the money that it earns what it wants to do with the money that it earns. And if we have a system where the government gets to come in and say, oh, well, this person doesn't have enough money, so we have to take the money from here and put it there, it's never going to work. The
Do
government
you
doesn't work
disagree
like
that a corporation should be allowed to do whatever it wants to with the money that it earns?
I think a corporation should be able to do whatever it wants with its money. However, it should be accountable to the people that A, give them money, and B, the people that works for them, and it should pay its fair share. Right now, corporations in the top 1%, they are not paying their fair share. Our tax code, I'll agree with Trump.
What a fair share is.
The fair share means that if I'm paying 20 to 25% or even 35% in my tax rate, so should Mitt Romney. If when I create my business, I still have to be accountable to these fees because I can't afford a lawyer who can just write everything away from me, so should Apple or Enron.
But would it bother you, because you talked about your tax bill, would it bother you, does it bother you at all that Mitt Romney, for example, that Donald Trump and his family, for example, will be paying a lower tax rate than you?
Yeah,
does it bother you that
it does.
Warren Buffett pays a
it
lower
does.
tax rate than his secretary?
Absolutely. What I advocate personally is a flat tax. I think that's fair.
Well, we'll have to debate that another day.
Well, that's it. Yeah, we'll have to get
rabbit hole
Steve Forbes on that. Let's move on. Let's move to our next topic. We gotta burn through this immigration.
Immigration policies. Okay, I'm not going to talk too much on this, but I think
Yeah,
we're
let's
going to
do
let you
this
go
one.
first, Stanley.
I can't give him a grade. So he's pushing a completely xenophobic policy. He tried to make a ban. He tried to put an executive order that would ban an entire group of people from this country. Then said it wasn't doing that. Then called it that on Twitter. And he's pushed forward no actual legislation to address immigration reform. There's nothing to grade on. It's just an incompetent person doing and saying incompetent things.
Okay, so that's an incomplete.
So he didn't show up.
All right. So I'm going to give him a B on immigration policy. I know that's probably very contentious here, but I say that for two reasons. First of all, I think he has done a good job of increasing the rhetoric of the fact that we're going to enforce immigration laws. I mean, we've already seen border crossings go down by a lot, and that's a good thing. That means less people trying to come here illegally. So that gets rid of the problem of then we can focus on the people who are here. So I think that's a good thing. And then secondly, I don't agree that the travel ban is a xenophobic policy. It was never a ban on Muslims. It was a very limited time ban
He called it
on
that.
people from certain countries where we historically have seen terrorists coming from. It's not people from these countries can never come here again. It's until we figure out our policy towards people who are attacking us, we're just going to limit immigration from these places. That's all.
So I'm going to give him a D. I know we got to keep moving. I'm going to give him a D because I do agree that it wasn't a ban on Muslims, and I don't think he ever called it a ban on Muslims, and I don't think anybody in the administration ever called it a ban on Muslims. I think the media did, and the truth is there were 52 Muslim nations that actually weren't a part of this ban. So if you're going to ban Muslims, you did a really bad job of it, and it is temporary. I give him a D. I really want to give him an F because I do think that it was an irresponsible thing to do to ban people from these countries. I don't think it helped us in any way, and I certainly don't think it helps us in any way to ban refugees from Syria. I think it's irresponsible. I'm going to give him a D mostly because he hasn't built the wall yet. So I'm going to give him a D mostly for the same reason that Stanley gave him an incomplete.
Yeah, that's why I'm giving him a C, because I think the ban that he rushed through was very poorly thought out. I mean, this was the Steve Bannon influence, and it's been smacked down by the courts. I know he said, "I'll see you in court," but I just don't think the way that it was structured was thoughtful, and it wasn't legally sound in many respects. So, and also, he hasn't done the wall, and this was the problem with a lot of conservatives like
now,
me.
Now, you giving him a lower grade because he hasn't done the wall, or because I gave him a lower grade? I gave him a higher grade because he hasn't yet done the wall. Instead of an F, I gave him a D. You're saying you give him a higher grade because
I'm saying because it's a lower grade in the sense that the promises that he was making to build the wall were totally
very different reasons.
Fantastical. Anyway, this would be a C+, but I don't have a plus.
Okay.
Anyway, let's move on really fast. Let's talk about foreign policy. I'm going to give him an A, just because, as we talked about 2 weeks ago, I was so proud of how he basically has stood up for Pax Americana and our role in the world, like World War II going back even, like we were the beacon of freedom around the world. And I think what he did, in response to the sarin attacks in Syria, even the Democrats all fell in line behind. Nancy Pelosi did, Chuck Schumer did. They all came and unified behind this response to what was happening when you're gassing your own people. And then, with Afghanistan, just showing our foes that, we're not going to sit down and take it anymore, because that's what we've been doing for the last 8 years. So I give him an A.
Okay, I'm gonna make some progressives mad because I'm only gonna give him a C instead of a D or an F, and I'm gonna do that because I do believe that it was time to take some sort of action in Syria with these chemical weapons attacks, and I appreciate the fact that something was done. And I also appreciate the fact that that was all that was done right now, and that he didn't get us embroiled into a war. So that knocked his grade up a little bit. We can't sit here at this same desk a few weeks ago and agree that it was the generals in the military who made the decision to drop the bomb on Afghanistan, and then a few weeks later give Trump credit for it. Because so I'm going to skip over that. The thing that bumped his grade up for me is the fact that he seems to be listening to H.R. McMaster, and he seems to be listening to General Mattis, who I am thanking God every day are at the helms of their departments. And it's lower because we have never been closer to a war with North Korea or to military threats from North Korea since the 50s and 60s when we're near a Bay of Pigs thing. And that scares the hell out of me. So I gave him a C mostly just to kind of hope. I gave him a higher grade because I want him to not lose his mind and bomb somebody. Okay, Alexandra.
All right, so I'm going to give him a D, and that is because I think he's completely inconsistent. So he's done some things that I think were good. I think his response, we needed to have some kind of response to Syria. And as you said, he's been listening to people who I trust a lot more than him on foreign policy. But foreign policy is not something where we want the president of the United States, wheeling and dealing and just kind of changing by the day on what he thinks about any given country, what he's doing just yesterday and today with North Korea and South Korea. He's just playing games. He doesn't understand what's going on. And I think that's a very good way to get us into serious trouble in any number of foreign relationships.
I think we all know what I'm going to give him. I wouldn't trust Donald Trump to manage my fantasy football league, let alone the government. He threatened to invade Mexico. He hung up on Australia. He dropped the bomb, the mother of all bombs, pardon me, in Afghanistan. Why, guys? No one knows. They lost the ship. The ship was in Australia. They said it was going to North Korea. Then they said they never said that, even though it was documented. And then he drops 59 bombs on a Syrian army base to stop them from apparently attacking their people. And a day later, that same air base that they bombed flies off and bombs their people again. He also has no clear plan for Syria, which I can't really, give him too much punishment for, because neither did Obama. But then, while he's doing that and saying how much he cares about these Syrian refugees, he has a ban on them. Listen, we can be very honest about this. Donald Trump is A, incompetent, B, racist, and C, does not listen to many people. I pray to any guy there is out there that he listens to Mad Dog or whatever that guy's name is, but his foreign policy so far has been a disaster. And I'm just waiting for two things: A, World War III, because it feels like it's coming, and B, the Hunger Games. And hopefully, Carrie, you will be someone who donates to me when I'm out in the fields out there fighting the other 31-year-old
I have
activists.
excellent kidneys. Yes.
Okay, we got to give an overall grade. The nice thing about being streaming online is that we're probably going to go over a little bit today, folks. But
Yeah,
you know,
but let's just
we'll cut
like
it into
burn
chunks.
through
Yeah, let's
quick
go ahead.
overall. This is the
grades.
final for the whole package.
Who went first last
The
time?
whole package. I went first.
Okay, so this time we'll let Stanley go first.
I've taken up a lot of talk time. A D, racist, incompetent, has a staff full of racist and incompetent people attacking working class families to give tax cuts to the rich. I hope he gets impeached and we get rid of all Republicans in Congress and Senate in 2018.
So that's a higher grade than I would expect.
I
based
thought he
on
was
that
gonna do an
explanation,
F.
But okay.
Sure. I give him a C, and that is because he's done some very few good things, but largely he's done nothing. And I think a president has to have done something by now to speak for him, but he's been inconsistent. He's been inactive. He showed that he has a steep learning curve and is trying to do his best, but he doesn't really know how Washington works.
Okay, I'm going to give him a D also because I think that he has not done as horrible a job as he promised he would do when he was running for office. And a lot of the things that he has said that he was going to do have not come to fruition yet. So day 200, if he passes this atrocious healthcare repeal, if he passes this absolutely atrocious tax reform plan, then I will have to turn my F upside down again for him. But for now, because he has been somewhat incompetent, he has not quite failed as much as I thought he would.
So I'm gonna give him a B.
Jesus Christ.
So I'm giving him a B because he has so outperformed my expectations. Like, in terms of, and actually, we should put up our poll when we're transitioning because we asked our Twitter followers
Go quick vote.
what
quick
we
vote.
all what people think. But a lot of people were saying in the poll that they think that he did as well or even better than expected. And
Well, that's
for
why I
me,
gave him a D
that's,
instead of an F.
yeah, that's why I give him a B. Just because he's putting people like Stephen Bannon on the out track, and he's putting people like General Mattis on the ends. And so, you know, and I love the tax plan. I think it would be a jumpstart to the economy, and I think that the healthcare conversation is going where it should go. And so I hope that I can give him an A later on. That's it.
It's very difficult to just sit here quietly when
Likewise.
you say some of these things. But I love you two. The guests incredible today, Alexandra and Stanley. Thank you very much for joining us. Come back when we can have more time to just really dig into some of this stuff. Hopefully we won't have to have anybody back to talk about this tax reform bill passing.
There will be tax reform.
Oh, Jesus. Okay. Well, like I said,